Alright, here's an update video on the M38. So today, what the plan is to do is I want to take the fenders off both sides. I want to take the grill off. We're going to take the radiator out. I'm going to try to take that battery box out over there on the other side. And I'm going to get this 24-volt starter out. It's sitting in here, back there. I'll show it when I get more access to it. But I'm going to get all this stuff apart and test the starter and see if the starter is still good. I did order some new 24-volt original, they're NOS wires for this Jeep, and I also ordered a W Carter carb kit that's supposed to be here this week. So we're going to get started on this. We're going to get it running first, and then we're going to start doing some body work on it. I want to get the body off the chassis as well. I'll probably have to suspend it in here in my garage, roll it out, pressure wash it, hit it with some POR, knock all the stuff off of it. But right now I'm just taking the bolts out. Here they're 1/2-inch bolts that hold this fender in place. Looks like there's about 8 of them. So I already snapped one of them off because it was rusted to nothing. So once I get the fenders and everything off, I'll come back to you. Okay, here's an update on the Jeep. So I've got both fenders off. I got the grill out. I've gotten the distributor cap off as well. Ordered some new wires, the 24-volt waterproof wires, the OE wires, so we're going to put those on today. I did take the starter apart to bench test it, didn't get anything out of it. What I ended up doing was actually going and buying all brand new battery and cables, and I went and bought I had one deep cycle battery already over here, which is really too big to fit in the Jeep, but I did replace it. I got another one, so we will have 24 volts to try to crank the thing up. I did confirm that it does crank. The starter does work. I turned it over without the spark plugs in it. So today we're going to be putting our spark plugs back in. We're going to test for spark. We're going to put our wires on our distributor cap, and we're going to try to crank it over and test for spark. And once I get the spark confirmed, I'll go ahead and get the WO carburetor that's on here rebuilt. I did take the hood off as well just to have some space. The next thing to come off once we've confirmed spark and we got, the engine pops over, is I'm going to take this windshield frame off, set it aside. I want to get this tub off of here and get all the stuff out of the inside so we can go ahead and have a rolling chassis. I want to get it out in the driveway, pressure wash it, do all that. But today we're going to test for spark. I'm going to get the batteries hooked up here in a few minutes and get our wires put in. One thing, if you do this wire job, and sheer stupidity and complacency on my part, there is a specific way these go on here. So when you put the new wires on the distributor cap, there's a nut on the side that goes in the distributor. There's a nut on here and here. On the side for the spark plug only, it's going to be just a 90-degree turn with a single nut. I had it on there backwards, not paying attention, just looking at it and not realizing it was two separate designs on either side. And so I did get this stuck, so I had to take a socket and push it out the back to get it freed. So that's where we're at with it. This is our distributor cap that I pulled apart. Just sits inside here to keep it waterproof. And there are seals in here. I'm gonna have to put that one back in. But there's seals on the inside as well, to make sure to get those. And here's the other. This is actually the one that came on the Jeep originally. This other one was replaced at some time. It's a Bosch one. Superior, excuse me, it's a Superior. So this looks like this is the one that was original to the Jeep. So, all right, well that's where we're at with it. We're gonna test for spark, and I'll show you guys the firing order stuff. I had to look it up on the internet, so we'll get everything back together and we'll discuss firing order. Okay, so I'm going to be putting this distributor back together before we get the spark plugs and all that stuff together to test for spark. One thing I want to show you on here is this distributor rotor. So I took that loose and just kind of took the corrosion off of it, cleaned it up. You can pull it straight off. It's got a key wave basically on it, so there's only one way to go on and off with it. Right down here is your distributor point. So this connection right here, you want to make sure that you run some emery cloth through there. You can see this one's pretty corroded. I'm going to clean up these contacts before we move forward, and essentially there should be some form of gap in there when it's not all corroded. I mean, it's sometimes the thickness of a piece of paper, so it's very, very tight. So once we get that looked at, we'll take a look, and you can actually adjust it up here. So it's a matter of loosening the screw and opening or closing the gap on there. So let's get this cleaned up, and then we'll get our cap back on and our rotor distributor cap, and the get the spark plugs tested. Okay, so we've got our distributor put back together, the cap back on. I've gotten all these rigged up. I've got our spark plugs in here. These are 24 volt, or excuse me, they're spark plugs that are waterproof, so everything screws together tight. What we're going to do is I'm just going to, down here is a little lever, right? So I'm going to put a pipe on this, and that engages the solenoid and turns the starter. Now, I've got two batteries, two 12-volt batteries hooked up in series for this starter to give it power. So we went from the positive side of the starter motor. The starter motor is grounded to the block, or the bell housing. And then we run our power wire down to the positive side of this battery. Then we ran another wire from the negative side to the positive side on this one, and then we've got our ground that grounds out to our frame right here. So we're going to go ahead and get the pipe, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set these somewhere on here where I can get a good ground and see if we've got spark on our spark plugs. So I'm going to have to find a spot to do that, and then I'll go ahead and put the pipe on there and engage the starter and test it out. Okay, so it's been a few days since I've been out here. I want to give you guys another update for this part 2 of the video. Engine is cranking. We do have fuel pressure. I did have to mess with the wiring a little bit, because after I cleaned up this distributor and put the new wires and everything on there, I was not getting any spark. Come to find out, 2 reasons. One, this wire down here, which this wiring harness in this Jeep, honestly, it's been hacked up over the years from it being in the military and then private use and all that stuff. But I was missing this wire right here, which runs from the regulator on the frame here to the wiring harness, and it actually bolts up to the starter solenoid on the positive side. Then you've got your positive side of your battery for your 24 volts. Then you've got your trigger wire for your distributor, which actually goes into the same harness right here. So once I got all this stuff figured out, there was only one other thing left to do, and that was for an ignition in the Jeep itself. So there is a wire here from where there was a key start, and there, one time when it was in military service, there was a little switch, on-off switch there, which was taken out, and a key was put in, right? So these wires were hanging down here. I actually just used the leftover clip I had to kind of hook everything together, and as soon as I did that and made all these connections, I put a breaker bar on the starter solenoid on the lever down there, and it has a really good strong spark. So we've gotten that worked out. Now, I did run into a few problems when I was messing with all this stuff. One being that the oil filter system, which is here, the lines were completely deteriorated. You know, they're like a rubber white, almost like a fiber woven cover that goes over, but they're rubber. They had deteriorated. One ran from here down to the timing chain cover here, and then the other one ran off this section here and runs down here just above the fuel pump. So what I had to do was, I can order these parts. They do make them still. They're actually, what it is it's a compressed fitting. So if you see here, like this one, here's the hose that broke. Here's the side that broke off. It's just a bunch of like basically brass fittings that go together, but they're pressed in. So one side, anyways, long story short, I went to Ace Hardware and was able to pick up these barbed 5/16 threaded fittings. I got 3 of those that fit between the 2 on the oil filter over here and the one that fits into this fitting here that runs down to the bottom of the oil pump. The other one was a different size, so I had to go get, this is actually a barbed fuel line fitting from O'Reilly's, and it threads right in here. And I'll have to clean that thread up and do it. But it goes in there, and what I'm going to do is I actually had some old Johnson Evinrude, like a fuel pump, like a hand priming pump. Since I don't own my boat anymore, I just decided to cut the thing up. So basically, like, I took some of this fuel line here and cut a section out of it. I'm going to have to cut one more section out. But I'm going to go here and put all these barred fittings in, put some Teflon tape on them, and we're going to, basically, it's going to resolve the issue. Now, what I was running into was when that line cracked and I was cranking over, it's sending oil from the sump down into the oil filter and back out here, back down to and it circulates down over the timing chain. So basically, it was just spraying oil out. As you can see, I got some on the floor down there. And what I did temporarily while this side was still hooked up, I just kind of bypassed it into the inlet for the oil, so it was draining back into the engine. But long term, well, this is not a long-term solution. This is just a quick fix to get this thing to pop over, and then we're going to get a little deeper into this process. But once I know the engine runs, then I'm going to start getting the body off and everything, but I want to make sure it runs before we move forward than that. So this is just a temporary fix, barb fittings to, you know, get the oil from leaking all over the floor. Other thing I'll show you too that I started on this morning is my carburetor was very dirty. It was very corroded. It was actually, I had taken it off the Jeep about 10 years ago at my grandparents' house, and it got misplaced in their garage. And we were in the process of cleaning their house out recently, and my uncle found the carburetor. It had been put outside in a bucket somehow and was covered in corrosion. I did buy a carb kit, but I got it apart, and it had corrosion all over it. I'll try to link some pictures in here that I took before I did this. But what I did basically to get the corrosion off the carb body is I took Diet Coke, a little bit of apple cider vinegar and lime juice, and just stuck it in here, and I'm just letting it sit in these. I'm probably going to leave them in there till tomorrow. I might actually pull them out today and just drain it and refill it. But just trying to get those cleaned up, and it's working pretty well. These things were nasty before, and they're actually looking pretty good. You can see this one needs some work. It's still got a lot of corrosion on it, but I'll have to get all that off. But it is working, so it is cleaning it up. So back to the Jeep. I'm gonna get this oil lines rigged up, and the next steps are gonna be, I'm gonna go ahead and test it, make sure that they are not leaking, and then I'm gonna put the spark plugs in. I am gonna have to look up the firing order as well before, I'll make a video for that too before I move on. But I did gap these to spec. They are 30 thousandths of an inch. So we'll put those all in there, get the firing order correct, and then once we get the carburetor on here, we will be ready to roll. We'll go ahead and try to fire this engine off, and if it gives me just a couple seconds running, I'll be satisfied, and we'll move forward with dismantling everything else at that point. We'll strip it all the way down to the frame, so stay tuned. Okay, here's what we did here. So I got the Band-Aid in place. Now again, there are specific fitted and pressed lines that go from this oil filter to each of these parts of the engine. Now I am going to eventually buy those, but I'm holding off. This is, I said again, temporarily a Band-Aid until I can figure out where we're at with everything. So all I did was I ran this fuel line from, basically connects to an oil pressure line that goes up from the bottom, the oil pump, to the oil filter, back down, and feeds back down to our timing chain cover. So we should be good to go. We'll be nice and tight. I'll check for leaks when we crank it over. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and figure out the firing order. So I'm gonna look that up, and then I'll turn the video back and we'll talk about that. And I'm gonna get the spark plugs put in place, and then we're gonna move on to rebuilding the carburetor. So I neglected to also mention earlier the firing order for the Jeep before we finish this update video. So the firing order on the wires on the distributor is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the arrangement on the block on the head is 1, 2, 3, 4 from the fan going towards the firewall.